Hi, I'm Jamie Hitchings from Filmmaker U, filling in for Gordon Burke now. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify their skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com or follow us on Instagram or Filmmaker U. Every week we interview film professionals, and this week we're joined by Alex Schmider, whose work includes Chasing Amy, Framing Agnes, Disclosure, and Changing the Game. Welcome to the show, Alex. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Jamie.
Fantastic. So let's jump right in. So I got a chance to screen Chasing Amy, and it was a very unique story. And I'm just curious, what attracted you to the story, and when did you become involved with it?
Well, thank you for watching. I know there's so many incredible documentaries and films out there. So to spend an hour and a half with any film is deeply grateful by us as filmmakers. I met the director Sav Rogers in a general meeting through my work at GLAAD, where I'm the director of transgender representation. And immediately upon meeting him, I was drawn to his hopefulness, his love of movies, and as you see in the documentary, the life-saving nature of movies themselves in terms of the kind of representation that we can find and figure out who we are through them, which for him was Chasing Amy, for me was Boys Don't Cry. So I deeply resonated with that specific relationship we can have to a film or a TV show or a character that can change the way that we see ourselves and we see each other. And so initially it was just a general meeting, and I did something like I never ever do, which is say, if you ever need a producer, you let me know. I really like who you are and what you're about. And that just started a really lovely friendship. And it wasn't until I would say about a year later that he was trying to situate himself in the story a little more, which the other producers who were on the project kept encouraging of him because he really was resistant. He didn't want to be a protagonist in this film. Um, for a number of different reasons. That's not what he'd set out to tell, or but increasingly his story was the anchor for why all of us as producers were interested. And so as he was figuring out how to put himself more in the film and talk about his transition, um, he not only appreciated my producing track record and the stories I've told, but also mining for my expertise at GLAAD and how to tell that story in a way that would be received by the community well and received by broader audiences. So that was 2+ years ago, I think, at this point. It's a long-winded way of saying 2+ years.
I've been a camera person for 30 years, and I fell in love with cinema. I heard there was free film school in France, and I wanted to get into the French film school. I really didn't know anything at the time, but I knew at least how to take pictures. So I said, I'll try for the image department. And then when I miraculously got into the French film school, I fell in love with working with the camera. You're following what's going to be in the movie. So that immediacy that the camera allows is what I loved from the beginning. I'm Kirsten Johnson, and this is my course about documentary cinematography.
So I'm curious, this brings up another question. How long was Sav working on the piece in total? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I mean, he says that it was basically since he watched Chasing Amy at 12 years old. Like
Okay,
that's
that's a little bit of a
really
cheat.
began. Yes. But it's been about 6+ years, really, of picking up the camera. Although when he did the TED Talk as well, which is shown in the film, that was intentionally to try to see like if there was a way to make this film. So he's what I appreciate about Sav is both a director and a creative um visionary, as I like to call him, is there's a process and there are steps by which we can be creative and scrappy and resourceful and figure out a way to make when it feels all but impossible to. So if we're not going by when he first saw Chasing Amy, it's been about 6+7 years at this point.
Yeah, yeah. That's a labor of love for sure, sitting with a project for that long.
Yes.
So you mentioned the TED Talk, and I found the TED Talk to be really. I'm an editor by trade, so I look at things with an editor's eye. I found the TED Talk to be really impactful. That was seated kind of, very upfront in the start of the movie. And now you mentioned that the TED Talk was kind of, the creator trying to figure out if there was going to be a story that he could tell behind this. When was it your idea to have the TED Talk in the film, or was that something that was before as he was trying to insert himself more in the film?
I think that, and that's a great question. The TED Talk was always going to be somewhere in the film, but it's really a credit to how Sav wanted to structure the sequence and the narrative arc in the documentary. It was important that people understood from the very outset, why the heck are we focusing on Chasing Amy? Um, and we do that by both talking about it made more money at the box office. It was this queer film of note and all of these things. And then really, again, anchoring it back to the personal. Why are we here? Why do we care? Why is Sav the person that we should be interested in exploring this topic? And so it was really his vulnerability and wanting to put that at the very jump of like, here's who I am, here's why this is important to me, that we could then ground the rest of how the story unfolds. And I also want to say, as someone who deeply appreciates editors, am so grateful for every editor I've worked with, that our editor Sharika was also deeply involved in the sequencing of where things were put so that the audience who may not be familiar with Chasing Amy understood why a queer kid growing up in Kansas had a particular significance and tie to this film that the LGBTQ community, for one reason or another, may not resonate in the same way that Sav did. Thank you for asking that question. I think a lot of times we're asked specifically about the content in the film and not always about the craft, which I think is both Sav and I experience as transgender filmmakers. Like, we are really interested in also talking about the craft.
Well, that's what I'm interested in too. So you came to the right
Right.
place. You're in the right Zoom room today. So, follow-up question from that, just again, kind of more the craft question. About 1 hour, 10 minutes in, there was an interview with Joey Adams. I think it starts about 1:10. And the way that sequence was presented to the audience, that was kind of like a brick wall almost, because Adams was like, I'm not sure what you want me to talk about, and Sav promised to deliver, something more than just the basic Chasing Amy interview. And to me as a viewer that was watching it with fresh eyes, I wasn't sure where the piece could go from there.
Mhm.
So it's just a really interesting thing. And I don't know if I'm projecting that because it was kind of a different feel than the rest of the film, but
Mhm.
did the filmmakers have to, did Sav and the editor and the other filmmakers that were involved in this, did they have to kind of rethink the rest of the film after they were able to talk to Adams? Because she starts to talk about being a woman, being a young, vulnerable woman, and Weinstein and all of that stuff during that interview, which was incredibly impactful.
We spent a lot of time talking about how to situate Joey Lauren Adams' interview because we recognize the level of vulnerability and openness for her to even push back and ask, what are you trying to get from me? Am I basically, because there is a power dynamic inherent in any kind of filmmaking, like there are cameras focused, there are lights, and Sav had done every bit of research that he could have to know as much as he could about everyone's involvement in chasing Amy and what their experience was. But there's nothing that compares to someone giving the gift of honesty and openness and their truth. And so it was deeply important for us as filmmakers to interrogate how we could respect the truth that she had gifted us in the entirety of what the story arc is. And ultimately, what you see in the film is really mirroring Sav's own experience and journey in looking into this film. It starts with the TED Talk, as we shared, that personal resonance with Chasing Amy. And then it talks about it being a massive success and how that launched Kevin Smith's career, and how the LGBTQ community had a lot of disparate reactions to that. And so as we're building the story, it starts with the success, with the life-saving nature of this film, and then we get into the complicated relationship that queer people have with this film. And Sav was very specific and directive about, we need to show the audience, as I experienced this sort of breakdown of a dream, of an ideal, of a projection, of an illusion that I had, because he was of a certain age, felt this very personal relationship, but hadn't been able to integrate the multiple perspectives and experiences that were embodied within this one film. So what you see is actually how Sav was processing it through. Obviously, we had to figure out how to edit that so that it was clear that this was a dam break for him as well. And that's why the tone drastically shifts, because nothing can go back to the way it was once you are shown or awakened to a truth that you weren't aware of before. And I think there's a lot of thematics that we could also pull from that in getting to know yourself and what that means to share that. And so the tone is specifically and intentionally shifted, because there's no way to be the same person or the same audience that we were before once we are gifted with the truth that Joey is so generous to share and so trusting with us to share it.
Yeah, it was definitely a turning point in the film. I was just kind of I wasn't expecting that shift in tone, and it was just it made me pay a lot of attention. I was like, what? Like even the camera angles that were used and everything else, I was just, it was very, yeah, very honest filmmaking. Sorry.
Thank you. I mean, and I need to also say about Sav, and you hear that I have such deep respect and admiration and love for the guy, that is a hard interview for him to watch, because, he is a very well prepared filmmaker. He does his due diligence and research, and he had to sit in that moment and receive this feedback that he was not expecting. And so we also made the choice to show that discomfort, to show him on the other end. Like, it was important to have him in the frame. It's not easy to do that, but he was like, this is important for the audience to see that this is not something we were expecting or looking for. This is very much a surprise, but we need to take that surprise and that new information to integrate it into how we see all of the things. And so I'm always glad to hear when it hits people in a certain way, because I think it makes then the end shift of, Sav and Riley walking out of the studio to say, these things that we hold on to, they can be important and they can have significance, and those things can change over time. There is a fluidity in that. And so to see him be able to sort of let go of this idealistic version of what he knew of this film, it shows both an openness and a growing on his part, but also, like, hopefully for the audience to be able to know that we can think differently, we can ask different questions, we can wrestle with things, and those may not always be the same answers as we came to at one point in our lives or another. It's a transition story in a lot of meta ways.
Totally, very much so. So switching directions just a little bit. I'm curious when you became involved with GLAAD. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, I have been working at GLAAD since about 2016, and my story about working at GLAAD is that, as I mentioned, seeing Boys Don't Cry also as a 12-year-old, it was both deeply relieving to know I wasn't the only trans man in the world, but also deeply horrifying. And I credit as delaying my own self-acceptance and transition for a decade, because I saw, if that is the only vision of a future you see, that it will end in violence and death, that's not much of a future to look forward to. And so when I was transitioning myself about a decade later, I didn't know trans people could have jobs. I never saw that represented in any way that I related to. So I went into advocacy. I didn't set out to be in filmmaking, although I love films. I always wanted to be. I didn't know there was a path to do that. So going to GLAAD was, and is, deeply personal for me. I never want anyone to be finding themselves and not have multiple different stories and characters and people to hold on to as possibilities for the future that they might be able to have. And so in my work at GLAAD, I consult, advise, educate, and train content creators on how to tell the most authentic and accurate stories about the communities that they're portraying, specifically around transgender and non-binary people, but that also extends to the larger LGBTQ community. And so it's necessarily informed also the way that I choose projects, the way that I want to tell stories as a producer, knowing that and Sav and I share this, and it's why we are collaborating, thinking about the other projects that we make together. How do we reach outside of ourselves and our communities and tell stories that are universal in their specificity, but add the dimension of self-acceptance that's required in living as who we are. And I think um there's so much to dig into there. So I'm sort of getting away from your question, but my day job is ideally helping characters and stories be more authentic and accurate. And on the worst days, it is mitigating harm and making sure that stories that do harm um, our communities are made better or not not presented without some sort of context and awareness behind that. Because there's a statistic that I think is important to cite, that more Americans believe they've seen a ghost than met a transgender person. And while it's both hilarious and deeply horrifying, that means the role of media is all important, because that could be someone's first interaction or familiarity to a member of our community. And for us ourselves, that is the first introduction. And so the role of film and television, these expedient ways of communicating and familiarizing people with people who may otherwise be unfamiliar in their lives, is deeply consequential. And I don't take that um I don't take that lightly, and that responsibility without deep reverence for what it could mean for someone's life.
Thank you. That was a fantastic answer, and it was not, you didn't get off the cuff at all. I think it was all very, very vital. And I can't remember who said it, so forgive me for this, but in Disclosure, there was a quote, and I'm paraphrasing here, that 80% of Americans don't know or don't think they know a transgender person. And I'm curious, and I'm curious about your work with GLAAD in informing cisgender people. Trans people are out there, and you probably know one, like the unfortunate ghost. Like, more people think they've seen a ghost than a transgender person. It's like, and I don't quite understand where my question is going, but I guess I'm just asking about protecting the LGBTQ plus community, but also kind of advocating for broader acceptance
Yeah.
in the cisgender community.
Yes.
Um,
And I know exactly who said that, because he is my boss, Nick Adams, a transgender man himself who's worked at GLAAD for 25 years. He's an undersung hero in our community who has been on the front lines of fighting for representation before anyone was paying attention, like really laid the groundwork for how we could have a footprint in Hollywood. And everything I know and have learned is from him. And I try to bring that into all of my documentary filmmaking and my work at GLAAD, and always looking towards the future of how do we keep pushing and not remain satisfied with settling for the bare minimum of representation. And to your question, I think something that we can't forget or discount is, as you see in disclosure, trans people have always been around, by the way, in every indigenous culture and community across time and history. But the reason we often don't know about those communities, traditions, and cultures is because of white Western colonialism. Those cultures are either wiped out or punished or criminalized, or those stories are not being told from the people who are actually part of those communities. It's not to say that stories can't be told by a variety of different people, but that depth of knowledge, experience, and collaboration also has to be embedded in that process in order to get it right. So when we're talking about representation now in 2023, we can't escape the very real history and reality that trans people have always been around, but for the last 100 years or so, as you see in disclosure, we have been represented as serial killers, sociopath, psychotic killers. I mean, the worst that you can imagine of humanity. And those are the things we are having to overcome in the stories that we tell, because as more and more people get to know trans people, part of the responsibility of media is that you help, again, familiarize people with people you may not know in your personal life, so that their reactions in real life are not, as Jen Richards has talked about in disclosure, that she shared she was trans and someone said, oh, like Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs. That is not who we are. That is not what our experience is. But because of the way that we've been portrayed, and frankly, that gender transgression has often been portrayed as something devious and deceptive, and we have to, again, overcome that and disrupt that very, I think, reflexive train of thought of a false mental template of who trans people are. And so to your question, specifically, of how do we reach our community and how do we reach and accelerate acceptance for trans people in the LGBTQ community, I think it is to focus on our humanity. How are we similar? We may have different struggles, and we can talk about those, certainly, but we are not as different, I think, as the ways that we've often been portrayed as having these very unique troubles as humans, when there's a lot more overlap. Most of us are seeking belonging and acceptance and love. And um, I know for me, I'm like a boring old grandpa who just loves coffee and movies and hanging out with my girlfriend, like very quiet. We don't go to bed late. And like, those are stories I've never seen because they're not sensational. And yet, I think we just need more and more and more that humanize us so that we can get to a place that we can maybe have those villainous and monstrous representations again, but they're being told from the inside out and not projecting onto a community of fear that allows for scapegoating of us to occur, which is unfortunately what's happening out in the world. And media has a responsibility to know how those stories enter into a culture and a historical context, and they don't live in a vacuum, and they don't lack those consequences on real people's lives that we're seeing play out in the day-to-day. So again, I talk way too much. I don't talk in sound bites, but I hope that answered somewhere in your question what you were asking.
Got it. And you stated my question more eloquently than I even asked you. So thank you for that, because I was just kind of fumbling. I was like, oh gosh, I forgot who did that quote. Oh my
It was a
gosh.
perfect question. It was a perfect question.
So sorry about that. Now, all of your films, the majority of your films have deal with transgender people, transgender issues. Is there anything on the horizon? Did you have anything in the cooker, so to say, that you can share with us?
I have a number of different projects that I'm so excited to be working on, both nonfiction and fiction. I've mostly worked in documentary. That was totally by accident, not intentional. I've been so grateful to be a part of the projects I have been to this point, and I'm really looking forward. This is the one I can share a little more openly. Sav and I are partnering again on a scripted project that is how much can I say and not say? It's a scripted project that we're really excited about telling about it's a coming of age story about a trans boy. And he is visited by a Jiminy Cricket sort in the form of an A-list actor. And we're working with Elliot Page's production company on developing that. I can't really say more, but the ethos of the stories I want to continue telling are heartfelt and hopeful and deeply human. And when I say that, I mean expanding the specter of emotion. We can be in the tragedy, we can be in the triumph, and we can be everything in between. That is very human. So that's the one that I'm really excited about, but there are multiple others in documentary as well that I'm really excited about that are supporting emerging directors who have something really new and exciting to say.
That's exciting. I look forward. I'm gonna be creeping on your IMDb, trying to see what you're doing next. What's in pre-production right now? Oh, yes, I do creep on IMDb's.
I
Sorry.
do too. IMDb, like, love it, and I want to give a shout out to IMDb as well, because some of the work we've done with IMDb, especially IMDb Pro, is adding in ability for creators to add demographic info about themselves. And as we create an industry that is more authentically representative of the people whose stories are about and who are telling those stories, those kind of features and functions are going to help us be able to find that talent, and allow our industry to look and sound and feel the way we know that the world exists.
Fantastic. So last question right here. I'm going to ask you, what's your guilty pleasure, either film or TV series that you watch? Maybe your comfort show or comfort movie. It can be old or new. It doesn't have to be anything earth-shattering, but what is it?
Okay, I'm going to do 3. I did have time to prepare for this. I have a lot of guilty pleasures because I like what I like, and I am sort of unabashed about that. I love rewatching The OC from Josh Schwartz because I grew up in Orange County, California. Deeply relatable. The soundtrack for that TV show remains like pinnacle on what I listen to on Spotify. The next I would say is The Office. That is my comfort show. I will watch it as I go to sleep. And then finally, maybe the most controversial, guiltiest of the pleasures is I watch The Bachelor and have religiously since it started way back in like 2004. And I just love the formula of it, and I love the community that it creates from it. I miss the days when we were binging weekly something and would get to talk about it, all of us, like what just happened. And it's that social nature of experiential viewing that I just love about that show, and had over the past year for the Golden Bachelor, weekly get-togethers with some of my queer friends, watching it, doing quizzes around it. And I am very hopeful that in the future there will be a trans bachelor and or bachelorette contestant, because I honestly think that could have profound impact, also on the way that trans people get to see ourselves in love and desired, which is something that I know is real, and is just underrepresented in media. And I'm a sucker for love stories and romance. So that it's a bit guilty pleasure and a bit selfish in the pro-social nature of it.
It's okay. It's a guilty pleasure. It doesn't have to be
That's true.
absolute. It's yours. It's precious to you.
Thank you, Jamie.
You're welcome. That's it for this week. You can check us out at Filmmaker U or follow us on Instagram at Filmmaker U. I'm Jamie Hitchings, and thanks for watching. And thank you so much, Alex, for your time and your words.
Thank you so much, Jamie, and Filmmaker U. This has been awesome.